Maybe you should.
Okay, that's the meeting recording. So I'm now
Elizabeth Ann, can you wait a wee minute? I see Stephen's got his hand up, interpreter.
Yeah,
Stephen.
sure.
Hi, this is Stephen, the interpreter. I've had a message from my colleague and co-worker, Eddie Foley, that he is in the waiting room.
I've just let him in.
I see his name on the list. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Could I just remind everyone to keep their microphones on mute unless they're speaking, please? Okay, sorry about Elizabeth Ann.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'll now take the statement of the Community and Enterprise Resources Committee on Tuesday, the 28th of September 2021. I can see that we have Councillor Anderson present. We have Councillor Bradley. Councillor Chalmers is present also. Councillor Convery. Yeah, I can see.
Yeah, here, Elizabeth Ann.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cooper. Yeah, I can see that you're also present, Councillor Cooper. Thank you. We have Councillor Craig present. We also have Councillor Dorman, Councillor Fagan, Councillor Ferguson present. Councillor Horn. No. We have Councillor Hose present. Councillor LeBlanc. No.
Apologies for Councillor LeBlanc. She's unable to attend.
Thank you, Councillor Nellon. I have apologies from Councillor McAdams, but I have Councillor Devlin present, substituting for Councillor McAdams. Councillor McCallan is present. We have Councillor McClymont present. Councillor McCreary.
Apologies for Councillor McCreary, and apologies for Councillor McCreary, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald is present, as is Councillor McGeever and Councillor McLachlan. We have Councillor Nayland present also. Councillor Nelson.
Apologies for Councillor Nelson also.
Thank you. Councillor Ross. No. I have apologies for Councillor Scott, and Councillor Cowie is present to substitute for Councillor Scott. Councillor Walker?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Watson is present, and Councillor Wilson?
Sorry, I'm here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. We also have a number of officers present for today's meeting, and with that, I'll pass you back to the Chair to commence today's business. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thanks, Elizabeth Ann. I'd like to welcome you all to the Community and Enterprise meeting. And we'll go on to the agenda item number 1, the Declaration of Interest. In the Declaration of Interests. Okay, I don't see any hands up. We on to agenda item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, which is on page 5 to 12. Is there any issues arising from the previous meeting minutes? We take that as being the correct minutes of the meeting. Can we approve those?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay. Now go on to agenda item number 3, which is the monitor items, which is the revenue budget, pages 13 to 22. And Louise Harvey is going to take us through that. Louise?
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. This is the second report presented to committee for the financial year 21-22 and also includes an update on the resources-specific costs incurred in response to the COVID position to date. Paragraph 5 on page 13 outlines the financial implications for the resource as at the 13th of August, which is period 5 of our financial year, with a reported overspend of 1.939 million against the phased budget. The current cost for the COVID for the resource is an overspend of 1.891 million, and this reflects expenditure of 1.033 million relating to increased staff costs in support of the COVID response, costs resulting from increased domestic waste tonnage, additional transport costs, and the cost of PPE and enhanced cleaning. In addition, we have 939 representing loss of income for parking charges, private care of gardens and school meals, with a minor budget underspend offsetting these costs of 81,000 for food costs on school meals, corporate catering and the fireworks event. And this position does not reflect any impact for South Lanarkshire Leisure as at the 13th of August. The core budget for the resource has a minor overspend position at the 13th of August of 48,000, and variance explanations for each service area are detailed in appendices B through to F. Budget variants are set out at the bottom of Appendix B to F, and these reflect updates to Community Enterprises budget from the period the 21st of May through to the 13th of August. And these cover the following main areas: allocations of various savings to our services, budget realignment to reflect how we deliver our services, transfers from reserves to meet expenditure commitments, and the creation of budget to reflect external income and service delivery changes. So I can refer committee back to paragraph 2. The committee is asked to approve the following recommendations: that an overspend of 1.939 million as at the 13th of August, as detailed in Appendix A of the report, be noted, and that this in the main is COVID related, and that the proposed budget variants as detailed in Appendix B through to F are approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Louise. Any questions on this agenda item? I don't see any hands up. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
You agree the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. On to agenda item number 4, which is the capital budget, which is on page 23 to 26. And Lorraine is going to take us through this report.
Chair, it's item number 3.
No, we've done item number 3. That was the revenue budget.
My apologies, Chair.
Okay. No, that's all right. It's agenda item number 4, the capital budget monitoring, page 23 to 26. And Louise, Lorraine is going to take us through this. Lorraine?
That's great. Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. As the Chair said, this is the Capital Budget Monitoring Report on page 23, and it's the second Capital Budget Monitoring Report for the resource this financial year. It reflects the spend and budget position to the 13th of August 2021, which is our accounting period 5. Section 3 of your report provides a background to the programme and advises that the budget reported to the last committee was 46.735 million. Since that last meeting, adjustments have been approved by the Executive Committee, and these total an increase of 829,000, taking the revised budget for the year to 47.564 million. Section 4 of your report details the capital programme update for 21-22 and gives a breakdown in Appendix A of the report. Section 4.1 notes the resources total capital programme being the 47.564 I just mentioned, and it also notes the anticipated spend to date of 8.972 million. We also had spend to the 13th of August of 8.770 million, so we had a very minor variance of 22,000 behind profile as at the middle of August. If I can refer committee back to the recommendations in section 2 of your report and ask that the Community and Enterprise Resources budget of 47.564 million and spend to the 13th of August of 8.770 million be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lorraine. Any questions on agenda item number 4? Don't see any hands up. I'll move that report.
I'll second it.
Can we agree with the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to agenda item number 5, which is workforce monitoring, page 27 to 34. And Elaine is going to take us through this report. Elaine?
Yep, thank you, Chair. As you all know, this is a standard workforce monitoring report which is prepared by personnel, and I'm here today just to provide an update to committee with the employment information for the resource for the period of May to July 2021. As always, I'll just outline some of the key figures as detailed in your report. So you'll see it in paragraph 4.1 in respect of the resources absence figure for July. This was 4.9%, which did represent a decrease of 1.1% when compared to the previous month, although it is an increase of 1.5% when compared to last year. But again, obviously, when we're looking at our figures comparing to last year, we know that there's an increase in a number of activity just because of where we were as a council last year at this time. So looking at that, based on the absence figures and the projected annual average for the resource for 21-22, it's projected to be 5.6%, which is in comparison to the council-wide average figure of 4.7%. As always, we continue to monitor and follow the procedures outlined within our maximising attendance policy to support our employees to remain at work or return to work during their absence, or at the end of their absence. Members will also note that the information contained within the report includes absences as a result of COVID, and at the time of the report being produced, the levels within the council were sitting at 6.44%, with 1.9 related to COVID. As at last week, that figure was sitting at 6.6% for the council-wide absence figure, with a slightly decreased COVID-related absence of 1.6%. Moving on to section 4.2 of the report, we see that this details as detailed in Appendix 2, the occupational health information, which shows that there was 293 occupational health referrals during this period, which is a big increase of 117 when compared to the same period last year. Again, looking at Appendix 2, you'll see the biggest increase there is in physiotherapy referrals, and that's probably in line with, again, where we are in terms of work compared to last year, and also there are face-to-face physio referrals happening now. If you recall, last year, obviously, a number of that was being done over the phone. Section 4.3 goes on to detail the accidents and incidents, and you see that there was 31 recorded within the resource for this period, an increase of 27 when compared to last year. Similarly, looking at 4.4, which shows the employee relations activity, there were 6 disciplinary hearings noted as taking place during this period, with no other activity happening. 4.5 shows the analysis of leavers, and of the 41 eligible for an exit interview, 8 exit interviews were conducted, and members will be aware that we try and encourage uptake on that as much as we possibly can, but obviously it is voluntary, but it's just obviously we try and encourage that. 4.7 details that 83 employees left the resource, and managers have indicated that 82 of those posts are being replaced, and 1 post was filled on a fixed term contract basis. Section 5 shows the information relating to staffing watch information for the resource as at June of this year, and you'll see that there was an increase of 190 employees in post. This is largely, about 2/3 of that is made up from seasonal intake within grounds and some additional temporary employees within waste, and with the remainder of the post coming from facilities and a small number spread across other areas within the council. There are no other employee or financial implications to note, so I would just refer committee back to section 2 within the report and ask for committee to approve the recommendation to note the employment information for the resource for the period of May to July this year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Elaine. Any questions on agenda item number 5? Excuse me.
Councillor
Thanks, Chair. It was just to see if we could get more meaningful information regarding maybe using 2019 as a comparison for some of these figures, because of how it was, well, last year it wasn't a good year to compare anything. And I think we asked for it in Social Work Committee, the last committee, so it would be helpful if actually the whole council could give us the same figures, 2019 as well as 20 and 21. Thanks.
I don't think we could answer for the whole council, but I'm sure Elaine will answer this for community enterprise.
Yeah, I can. I think by the time Councillor McClymont that the reports were done, in terms of that request, I'm aware from discussions with Kay that we're going to look at that, so I certainly can get some more information. If there was anything specifically you were wanting, I can certainly get that and send it to you after committee, or if you're just looking for a comparison of all of the key stats against 2019, I can have a look at that and send that one to you.
I think it's just for the next time round, Elaine, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands up. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
Agree the report?
Agreed.
Okay, move on to agenda item number 6, which is the resource plan, page 35 to 74. And Michael McGlynn's going to take us through this. Michael?
Thank you, Chair, and afternoon all. So the purpose of this report is to provide the Community and Enterprise Resource Plan Q4 Progress Report, which covers the period 1st of April 2020 to the end of March 2021. So this is the final report for that year. You'll see at section 5.1 of the report, all the measures are set out in Appendix 2, which is quite a detailed list of information on what we intended to do and how we've performed. And you'll see that, as ever, coloured through our colouring scheme through from blue, green, amber and red, but there's also a number which are report late and also contextual as well. And following on from that, Chair, you'll see the positions summarised, should I say, at 5.2. And at the right-hand column, you'll see the percentage of green, which is just over 58%, and just over a quarter sitting at amber, with the remaining report and contextual sitting just over 16%. So over the piece, Chair, I would suggest that's a pretty good performance by the officers, particularly during a difficult year, and would highlight that there's actually no reds, which is good to see. In terms of achievements, just a few to pick out, Chair. Firstly, in terms of roads carriageway improvement, we covered 3.1% of the road network. That was actually up from the target once COVID actually started to kick in, so that was good to see. We also supported just over 3,000 businesses through the COVID business grants over the piece. Again, that was a major piece of work for not just economic development officers, but also officers across the council, particularly in finance and corporate resources, which provided a great support in getting the payments out to the businesses. But it's just to give the scale of the number of businesses that were supported. And just last year, just noting that we concluded the work of the cross-party working group into South Lanarkshire Leisure, and this was reported to and approved by the full council back in June earlier this year, which will then give a basis for the Trust to move forward with the agreed recommendations in the action plan. So just with that, Chair, I would take members back to paragraph 2.1 of the report and ask for the recommendations to be approved as set out, and happy to take any questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions on agenda item number 6? I see Joe Fagan, you've got a hand up, and then David Watson.
Thanks, Chair. There's two issues arising from the report that I wanted to raise. I don't know if you want to take each in turn. The first one relates to the Spaces for People project. There's an ongoing project that's been hit by various delays due to the pandemic and then supply shortages in my area. But it's an important one for all of East Kilbride because it does affect the train station and West Mains Road. It's currently in amber. I think it'll still be in amber. The date given for expected completion was May 2021. That's been pushed back several times. The latest date for completion I was advised of was in September. Given that it's now the 28th of September, can I ask if there's any update on when that project is likely to conclude? And additionally, as the project has been delayed for some time, and there are a whole separate issue about consultation before the project commenced, but a lot of concerns. I've been receiving a lot of concerns about people concerned about access to the train station, and they can see as the project has taken shape that it might not provide sufficient access to the train station. Improving the active travel network is important, so too is the public transport network, and they've got to sit alongside each other. Can I just ask if those concerns have been received at any point by the council, and what assurances we've got that there'll be proper access to a train station that ultimately is our intention should be upgraded? And specifically, we're not, and I just want that assurance, we're not going to a one-way system, because some of those diagrams look a bit tight. We will be providing traffic for traffic to come both on and off West Mains Road and accessing the train station. So that's my first point, is about spaces for people, Chair. I do have a second point, but it's on a totally different subject. So I don't know if you want to take that first.
Yeah, I think we just take it to them at the same time, Joe, and then Michael can respond to both, or have one of his officers respond to them.
Right, okay. So the second point I want to raise was around the emission reduction. So there has been a 28% reduction in vehicle emissions achieved during 2021, and that's obviously positive, but a lot of that will relate to the pandemic. There were those news reports at the weekend about the £1 million fleet. I think it was Renault's biggest order of electric vehicles in Scotland that has been idle. Now, there are reasons why pool cars wouldn't be getting used because of lockdown and the state that services were in. But I was reflecting on the discussion we had at the council last week. And in the discussion at the council last week, we talked about areas of service where we can't recover, or we can't fully recover, because we're relying on other vehicles, for example, in refuse collection or in ground services, to in order to ensure that we don't have too many people in a cab or in a single vehicle. And I did wonder if those unused electric vehicles could be part of the solution. Could I therefore just ask, what is the current plan for those vehicles that are sitting idle? And can I just make sure that it's still the case that those vehicles that we ordered and that were delivered last year are replacing pool cars, that we are not currently operating with pool cars that should have been replaced, and we're not paying twice, as it were, for vehicles that we don't need?
Okay, thanks, Joe. Michael, you want to answer those points?
Yeah, sure. If I can do it in reverse order, if that's okay, Chair. So maybe just to put a wee bit of context to the question on vehicles, just for members' benefit, is that probably first, as members will be aware, this was funded through the Scottish Government Switch On fleet, which we accessed, and we placed that order of the Renault Zoes, and that was between October 2019 and March, and just as then COVID unfortunately kicked in. And certainly the intention is, and still the intention at that time, was that these would replace our petrol and diesel vehicles, and that remains the case. And I'll come back to that point in a minute or two. So the contract that we entered into at that time resulted in the vehicles arriving between June and November again last year. At that point, there was a reduction in vehicle use, particularly pool cars, but we're now starting to see the use of pool cars starting to increase again. And the figures I've received, Chair, is that 98 of the electric cars are currently in service, and the others are in the process of being placed into a pool car scheme. So we will see them replacing the petrol and diesel vehicles. Added to this is that when we ordered the vehicles, the intention was to expand our EV charging network. Again, unfortunately, that was delayed due to the pandemic, but also staff being directed to other frontline roles. So essentially, we had a combination of a couple of situations which has resulted in the vehicles not being fully utilised as we'd hoped. But now, as we're moving hopefully towards recovery, Chair, that we'll start to see those vehicles, as I say, 98 already in use, and the residual then being put back into use. So essentially, Chair, we put this down to timing and circumstances. So hopefully that'll give members the assurance that they will be appropriately used. Coming back to spaces for people, unless Ian Russell's on the call with us, unless Ian's got detailed information, I would probably take the opportunity just to revert back to Councillor Fagan on the completion date. He's correct in saying we're sitting, it's the 28th of September, so there's not many days left. So I need to get clarity in that. I don't actually have a completion date at hand. In terms of the concerns, Councillor Fagan, they haven't been raised directly with me in terms of access to the station. And as you'd imagine, we've got as much interest as members of the public in Network Rail to ensure that there's appropriate access into the station. So again, if it's acceptable to Councillor Fagan, if I could just have the opportunity to speak to officers and they revert back to them once I've got those details. But I would like to think that we wouldn't be doing anything that would prejudice access to the station. So I'll just finish there, Chair, if there's any supplementary questions.
Thank you, Michael. I've got Councillor David Watson, Councillor David McLaughlin, and then Councillor Kathleen McClyman. David Watson.
Yeah, thanks. So my first point, Joe's covered it to an extent, and Michael's answered it to an extent regarding the press reports at the weekend about the e-cars. I think the only thing, Michael, you've said there's 98 cars in service. How many are not in service? And also, when will we be in a position that we will be able to charge this fleet of vehicles? Because I think there's a substantial amount, and I'm not convinced that we have got that capacity, and I think you acknowledge that. I think the question then is, when will we be in a position to actually charge these vehicles? John, I've got a second point regarding, don't just find it. Apologies. Page 58 of the report. About the implementation of the Air Quality Action Plan and the reference to Beat the Street and how that ties into the air quality funds and air quality in the areas. East Kilbride had Beat the Street, and it was curtailed to the onset of COVID, and I'm just wondering what is the position with East Kilbride getting that funding for that next year? Okay, thanks.
Michael?
Yep, sure. So in relation to the vehicles that are still to be brought into a service, Councillor Watson, so we ordered 141, currently 98 are in service, so that would remain, if my arithmetic is correct, that would be 43 still to come into service. Again, I would need to revert back to you, get the exact phasing of when those remaining 43 will be in service. So again, if it's acceptable to Councillor Watson, yourself, Chair, I can get that information and email that out afterwards. I just don't have that level of detail at hand. If on page 58, the bids that we make for the Air Quality Fund is done on an annual basis, Councillor Watson, and in relation to Beat the Street, as members will be aware, we've sought to rotate that round the geography of Lanarkshire. And again, it may well be, and I think it has been successful as far as I understand. I think East Kilbride was one of the first, and there may be an opportunity then to come full circle with future bids. But again, we would need to do that as and when the bidding opens. So I can't commit to that, but certainly take Councillor Watson's interest to note. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, sorry, can I just come back? Yes. Regarding the charging, Michael, of the e-vehicles, you didn't reference that. Have we got the capacity to charge all 141 vehicles? And if not, when will that be in situ?
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon, Councillor Watson. Certainly my understanding is that if we are not at that position, we are very close to it. I think, again, sorry for perhaps stating the obvious here, is that the mileage that these vehicles now cover on one charge is significantly greater than it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But that's certainly my understanding, is that we should have sufficient charging to allow these 140 vehicles to operate efficiently.
Mike, am I correct in saying we've also put in a bid for funding for additional EV chargers?
Chair, that would be, I think you're referring to the Levelling Up Fund, which is looking at charging points which are open to, if I can use that term, open to the public and public use, and perhaps by the council. But we would rather ensure that these charging points are available for a general public, and that the council provides its charging points within its depots, within its car parks, rather than using public spaces if we possibly can, because I know in certain instances that can cause a degree of frustration. Thanks, Chair.
David, still your hand up with that legacy, or do you want to come back? Dave McLaughlin.
Thanks, Chair. I was going back to the pool vehicles. The question I got about the pool vehicles and the service they provide compared to what used to be in place. There was a study carried out a number of years back in a previous administration where we took the decision to use pool vehicles rather than allowing staff to use their own cars and claiming expenses back for that. I'd be interested to know now, and it's maybe not a good time, because if you think about the amount of infrastructure we're looking to put in place for our charging electric vehicles, but it's still a question I'd like answered, and maybe even if I don't suppose it can be answered today, but if it can't, maybe some sort of study carried out. As an example, when you attend a site visit, very often if an officer is going to leave their desk to attend a site visit, by the time they go and do the administration to get a pool card, do all the checks, all the necessary things, bring it back, sign everything off, the amount of time that officer's away from their desk to carry out a very short site visit compared to the amount of time they were away from their desk if they were just using their own car. Now, at the time, it was, I think the main reason was to cut back on the costs, but I wonder if it's worth looking at the cost, considering the amount of pool vehicles we've got, how much has that increased since that period of time, and if there's some way we can carry out some sort of analysis to see if that still is the case, if it's cost effective. And if it's not, and at the time we made a mistake by doing this, maybe we've learned from it, but I think it's worth, it's my view, I think it's worth looking back at that to see if, in fact, we do get the best value of officers' time using pool cars rather than their own car. The cost would be the mileage the officer would use, which would, in most cases will be quite small. The other cost would be for those staff members, if they're going to be using their car for business purposes, is the additional insurance premiums. So that's the sort of main capital cost, if you like, for a staff member, and they need to be reimbursed for that. But when you consider the amount of money that's spent, that there was I'm not going to say it was horrendous. It was quite a difficult one to swallow when you've seen that article and the amount of vehicles I've got, the amount of money that these vehicles have cost, versus how much officers' time were down as a result of having to use these vehicles and all the administration that goes with it. So I'm sorry if that's a kind of a sidewinder coming in here as regards what's on the agenda today, but I'm interested, and I'd like to hear Michael or anybody else's views on whether or not we should continue with pool vehicles or revert back to allowing staff to use their own vehicles.
Mike, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the point that Councillor McLaughlin is making, I'm not going to look back in the history of why it was brought into place. I wasn't a party to it at the time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the question isn't relevant now, because in essence that the office-based staff are working at home, will be working agilely, and therefore I think the question Councillor McLaughlin is making a very practical one, in the sense, is it really a good use of officers' time and also financially to travel from their home to, say, pick a pool car up in Hamilton and then perhaps reverse their steps, go into a site or a premise, etc. And that's a very legitimate and very relevant question. I don't have an answer to that, because as a director for this resource, I think the question that's being asked is across the council as a whole, if I've picked that up right, Councillor McLaughlin, is that really the best custom and practice? And I think as a corporate management team, we do recognise that. And again, Chair, not to duck the question, but rather this is more of a corporate issue as opposed to a community and enterprise issue. But I can understand why Councillor McLaughlin brought it up, because we're talking about vehicles at this point in time. So I think it is very much a practical point. And just one last thought is that if we were to ask employees to use their vehicles again, they need to be willing to do so. They need to be compensated for perhaps additional insurance costs. And that's an assumption that they've got access to a private vehicle that they may or may not have, because people may have then got rid of one vehicle or two vehicles within the household. So there's a lot of dynamics in there, Chair, but I think it's a relevant point that's been raised, and I give the assurance I can raise that with the corporate management team. I hope that's okay. Meantime, Councillor McLaughlin.
Chair, can I just come back briefly on that?
Yes, sure.
Michael, thank you very much for responding to that. And I know that it's, like I said when I was asking the question, I really don't expect an answer here, and it is rather a wider issue than just community resources. The point you made right at the end there is a valid point, I think, because it would suggest then that we need to keep a much smaller amount of pool cars. But based on my own experience, and I'm sure maybe other members would agree with this, I've actually had comments about the length of time that, if a 10-minute site visit can cost an officer up to 2 hours away from their desk. So I think that staff themselves, and I remember back at the time when it happened, because some staff were a wee bit aggrieved about it, but then they say, as an example, I'll just put this in as an example, there was one time when I offered to pick an officer up in my own car, and he said, well, no, because we've got a pool car system, I need to use the pool car. So rather than being away from his desk for a very short period of time, he wouldn't take the lift. And I don't blame him for not taking the lift, because the council policy had changed that they couldn't use private vehicles, they had to use the pool cars. So I think you've been knocking on an open door there, asking staff. I can't say for certain, I haven't got a crystal ball, but I reckon it would be welcomed. And on that, I really think it's worthy of exploring this further, because the amount of pool cars I've got is, it just seems, it seems excessive. And when you think about the amount, certainly for myself, I get a lot of criticism about the amount of, not directly to me, but criticism of the council about the amount of vehicles. Everybody talks about this fleet of cars that are lying in different car parks. It's not a nice thing to see these vehicles lying, not being used. So from a public perception point of view, I think that it's worth having a wee look at that. So Michael, just to go back to, I know you said it's not your resource, but how would you go about, or how could we go about, or how would I go about then raising it to a level where it is looked at a corporate level?
Sorry, Chair, just to answer. As you know, the corporate management team meet every Thursday morning. I will raise it there, and we normally feed back after committees in any event, so I can take it up there, Councillor McLaughlin. But there's nothing to stop yourself or other group leaders raising it in your meetings with the chief exec. So you may also choose to do that as well. But I'll certainly raise it on a Thursday morning.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Cathy McClyman.
Thanks, Chair. I think Michael's answered some of the questions that I had, and it was round about the electric vehicles and obviously the article that was in the paper at the weekend, and round about the charging units. As an EV user, I have got concerns about the council vehicles in public spaces. They sit for sometimes a day, 2 days, using a space, sometimes not even plugged in. Sometimes they are plugged in, but they've got a full charge, they're not getting moved on. So there doesn't seem to be any etiquette for the people who are driving them, so that they know that other people might want to use these spaces. So I do think you're going to have to look at it, because it's going to be a concern for the public if our vehicles are taking up the public spaces. And if you don't have the units, you'll need to get the units put in. There's units down at the main car park that, well, a week ago weren't working. They've been there for quite some time, so I don't know what's going on with them. So I do think we have to look at the charging units, because staff are not going to take them out if there's nowhere to charge them, and if the public are using them, well, they're entitled to use them because they were paid with public money. So I would like you to look at that again, please.
Okay, Michael, do you want to take that on board?
No, as I say, happy to do so, and I think there's a balance to be struck there. To, if there's a need to charge a council vehicle, they're not prohibited to do that. But perhaps Councillor McClyman used a kind of good word in there, that kind of equity. Sorry, I can not get my words right there, but fairness in using the spaces. So I'm happy to take that away, Chair.
Margaret Cooper. Margaret.
Thanks, Chair. I hope this isn't too obtuse, but I'm quite concerned about the number of vehicles that are public vehicles that use the electric charging points. A particular example, somebody coming home from their work at night, parking it in one of the public charging points, walking home, and that's it there until they come back the next morning. Now, there's an ongoing, whilst Catherine said public money paid for these charging points, it did for the installation of the charging points. But I've got grave concern about the cost of the actual charging and who's bearing that. Are we providing free fuel for people with electric vehicles? Because that's what it seems like. They come along and plug in, and South Lanarkshire, I presume, are paying for the electricity. So we're providing free fuel for the public to use these. I don't think that's a sustainable position for the council to continue like that. And people that haven't got that kind of vehicle obviously have to go and buy their petrol or their diesel. And at the moment, we're having to go into queues, etc., to do that. And fuel charges are rising all the time. And I'm very sympathetic to the green countryside and reducing the air pollution. But I also have an eye on South Lanarkshire's budget. And it'd be interesting to know how much it's costing the council to provide the general public with free fuel. I don't know if Michael can contribute to that at the moment, or it's something we need to bring a report back to committee on in the future. It's not sustainable, and what's the way forward? If the general public are using them, there has to be some sort of pay mechanism, in my view, to do that.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I don't know if Michael will be able to tell you offhand how much it's costing. There is more and more councils putting in charging for the electrical EV chargers, and I'm sure it's something that the council will probably look at in the near future. I don't want to preempt anything. Maybe Michael would say something on it.
Yeah. Just happy to make a few comments, chairs, that members may recall we are getting close to the end of a project with North Lanarkshire Council and Scottish Government in rolling out EV charging. So I'm trying to recall the number within South Lanarkshire. I want to say something between 25 and 30 is that increase. And within those update reports, we highlighted to members that I think we are now reaching a tipping point where it's appropriate for the council to consider charging for charging. Councillor Cooper is right when she says that we are providing free electricity and free fuel. My own personal view, Chair, I think that's the right thing to do in the public sectors. They are acting as a catalyst. But I think more and more we have to recognise that this is a cost to the public purse. And within the report, and this is from memory, Chair, I think it's maybe costing somewhere in the region between 40 to 50,000. But if the new charging points come in, I think that then starts to go into six figures, about 125. So the figures start to become a wee bit less sustainable than they were before. And certainly within the report, Chair, we've highlighted that we will be coming back with a report considering the options for charging. So really, I think concurring with most of what Councillor Cooper's saying there. Thanks.
Happy with that, Margaret?
Yes, thanks, Michael. I think that's an important step forward. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Peter Craig. Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was very interested in Councillor McLaughlin's point he was making about the time that could be saved, etc. But one of the variables which we didn't discuss at that point was the carbon footprint of the council, and that's also a very important variable. So I'm just throwing that in there with the mix. But it'd be interesting, Councillor McLaughlin's proposal would be interesting to see what the figures, how they stack up from there on. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I don't see any other hands up. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
We agree, agenda item number 6.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. We're going to items for decision. It's the Play Park Renewal Fund, page 75 to 78. And Alistair McKinn is going to take us through that. Oh, sorry, Mark, you your hand up. Is this for the next one? Right, okay. Just a bit sharp there. Okay, Alistair, can you take us through this report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report is to update members on funding being provided by the Scottish Government in relation to the investment in play parks. and it's to seek approval to introduce 2 further landscape development officers into the resource establishment for a fixed term basis of 23 months. Section 3 of the report provides background, and with the Scottish Government made a manifesto commitment to renew play parks across Scotland and provided funding in the region of £60 million to undertake that. For 2021-22, there's an initial £5 million allocation being allocated across the 32 councils, and that's been based on 95% of that is based on the population in each individual council area of 0 to 14-year-olds, and then 5% in rurality. Based on this allocation method, the South Lanarkshire Council has received an allocation of £298,000 for 2021-22. The remaining funding, £55 million funding, we're still waiting information on how that will be allocated across the councils and also over what period. And as soon as we get that information, we'll be able to provide that to the council. In section 3.7 of the report, it highlights that the council currently has 233 existing play areas, and there's a table provided showing the allocation across the 4 geographical areas. Section 4 of the report outlines our proposals. Amenity Services currently provides the design and ongoing review of play areas, and that's undertaken by our landscape development officers. Our existing staff are fully committed to the delivery of existing work programmes and with managing, developing and programming additional requests as they're received. Given the requirement to review all 233 locations, develop detailed plans for the sites to be refurbished and to manage the delivery on site, additional capacity via the appointment of 2 landscape development officers are required to undertake these additional works. It is considered the most appropriate use of the current funding is to employ 2 landscape development officers, and this will ensure that we can have some detailed plans and costings to allow us to be slightly ahead of the game when we get more information on the funding that will be provided to the council. Section 5 of the report outlines our next steps. So the existing staff and the new staff will commence and complete condition reviews of all 233 play areas. We'll look at completing play sufficiency assessments of them all, and we'll also evaluate and review the inclusive play area element that's currently included within the existing play areas. Taking all these 3 into account, we would then consider how we would allocate the funds that would be allocated to the council. We're also continuing to have discussions through COSLA in relation to additional funding that may be required to refurbish all the play areas in South Lanarkshire. Section 6 of the report highlights that it's proposed that we add 2 landscape development officers to the existing establishment for a fixed period of 23 months. Section 7 of the report, the financial implications, just confirms that the costs in relation to these 2 posts can be met within the existing allocation of £298,000. Section 8, there's no direct climate change or sustainability implications from this report. No requirement for an equality impact assessment, and as part of the ongoing design process, we will ensure that we do local consultation. I would refer you back to section 2 of the report and ask that the committee approve the addition of 2 full-time equivalent landscape development officers to the establishment for a fixed period of 23 months. That we note the update that's been provided as far as the funding allocated to date, and note that the outcome of the review of all the 233 play areas will be reported to a future committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Alistair. We seem to have lost Mark, who had his hand up very sharp. I think he's got a question, but maybe just need to email it in to you, Michael. Lynn Nealon and then Margaret Cowie. Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure Michael's going to shoot me down in flames over this one, but I'll go ahead anyway. With all due respect to the officers that are going to be employed into these posts, no slur intended or anything like that on the skill sets that they'll have. It does seem a shame that so much of this year's allocated money for renewal of play parks is actually just going to go on staff costs rather than actual play park renewal. It's just a comment and an observation, but any response back would be welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alistair, would you like to? Yep. Oh, Michael, you've got your hand up, Michael. You want to respond to that?
Just very briefly, and hopefully it'll be the same as what Alistair was just about to say. Probably first, Councillor Nealon, I'm not going to shoot anybody down in flames. All questions are relevant and appropriate. From our perspective, Councillor Nealon, as our view is that we are aware that there'll be future funding coming forward, and we need to have a development programme prepared to ensure that money is spent on an appropriate basis. Last week we briefly talked about this at the executive committee, where we need to have a methodology, but that has to be based on our understanding of which play area needs to be upgraded and to what level. And the only way that we can do that is by having the capacity and the officers to actually put that programme together. So I do take your point that you're not actually seeing anything physical on the ground from this initial tranche of money. But without doing that preparatory work, I think it would prejudice putting together an appropriate programme to renew as many of our players as the funding will allow. So hopefully that will give a wee bit of context, Councillor Neal.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Margaret Cowie. Lynn,
Thanks,
you've
Chair.
your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, on you go, Margaret.
It was just to highlight on point 3.7, Cambuslang and Rutherglen. They've only got 17 play parks, which seems extremely low for the big area that it covers. Also, on another point, is there any scope to use any of this money to create new play parks, or has it got to be used to upgrade the existing play parks that are in the areas? Because quite a few of the play parks in my ward have been upgraded recently and might not need it again, and once again we'd be losing out on any of that funding. But there's certain areas in my ward where there is no play facilities at all, or any play facilities within a mile. Thanks, Chair.
I'll let Alistair or Michael respond to that, but I know Robert Brown raised that at the executive, I believe, last Wednesday. So I think somebody will have an answer to it. Michael or Alistair?
John, as far as the allocation of funding is, it is for existing play areas, it is not for new play areas. So the only way we'd be able to use this money is to refurbish existing play areas. I also take the point about some other play areas that have been refurbished recently. What we are looking at, what we can do within this allocation, is look slightly wider than the play area and make sure that the actual path network that accesses the play area is suitable to allow as many people as possible to actually access a play area. We have some play areas that are accessed over grass, so this funding would allow us to make sure that the path network to those actual areas is more suitable to include as much access as possible. So that would be what we would look to do even for recently refurbished play areas. And again, we do take a comment about only 17 in Cambuslang Rutherglen area. Those are historical numbers. That they're not appropriate hysterical numbers. I'm quite sure most of you don't find it funny. Historical numbers. And again, we are always continually looking to see where we can improve what's there. But we have got a policy just now of not adding any more play areas to our existing numbers, given the number we have over the South Lanarkshire Council area. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Margaret Cooper, and we'll take the break after this item, the 5-minute break that we're required to take after this item, just to give you prior warning. Margaret?
Thanks, John. It's just really reinforcing a wee bit what Alistair said, that over 10 years ago the council undertook a review of all the play areas in South Lanarkshire, and they took a decision at that time to close a number of play areas, and that the future investment would be in the ones that were being left to make them better and strengthen their appeal for young people. And I think it would be, Margaret, I think it would be difficult because there's been a number of people wanting to open new play areas or ones that were closed at that time to bring them back again over the last 10 years. And the council's held quite hard and fast to that rule. And I take the point that a number of areas were upgraded recently, and quite a few in our ward, for example, managed to achieve funding from Viridor or the Renewable Energy Fund or both to put into developing the play areas. But I do think there's a historical element to when the review was carried out and the decision to close and to invest the funding in existing ones to strengthen them and make them a bit better. But I think there's also an issue, Alistair, with the fact that a number of the new housing developments who might have put small play areas in them have been encouraged not to do that. So some houses are further distance from the existing play areas. It might be something we need to come back and look at some point in the future.
Okay, thanks, Margaret. I'll take Margaret Walker and then Alistair can come back to the points it's raised. Margaret?
Oh, thanks, Chair. I'll be quick. Margaret covered some of it. It's just about looking at maybe alternative ways of funding. I know at the developments up in Gilbertfield, there's been negotiations, discussions with private developers around part of their community investment contributions to be looking at play areas. And maybe that's something we could discuss at some point, that as part of new builds and developments that they should be looking at in terms of their community investment contribution. And just I agree with Margaret. I mean, 17 is low, and it comes up. It's brought up fairly often about the kind of lack of play areas and other facilities like football pitches. And as Margaret said, looking at other sources of fundings as well as private developers and trying to pull something together. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Alistair, would you like to comment?
Yeah, again, I think as far as any housing developments, the housing developers do consider providing facilities out with the council and sometimes provide smaller play areas within the new developments, and the ongoing refurbishment and maintenance is then usually passed on to the house owners. So there is more than 233 play areas across South Lanarkshire, but those are the ones that are owned and managed by the council.
Okay, thanks. Right, we'll take the 5 minute. I better pass this, I suppose. I've got no other question or hands up. Margaret Cooper, no, you still got your hand up. Is that a legacy? Yep, okay. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
We agree with the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. We'll take a 5 minute recess break now.
you, Chair. So I can see that we have yourself, Councillor Anderson, present. We also have Councillor Bradley, Councillors Chalmers, Convery and Cooper are present. Councillor Craig is present, as is Councillor Dorman. Councillor Fagan is also present, as is Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Horn is present, as is Councillor Hose. We have apologies for Councillor LeBlanc and Councillor McAdams, and we have Councillor Devlin present, who is substituting for Councillor McAdams. Councillor McCallan is present, as is Councillor McClymont. We have apologies for Councillor McCreary. We have Councillor MacDonald present and Councillor McGeever. Councillor McLachlan and Nayland are present, and we have apologies for Councillor Nelson, Councillor Ross and Councillor Scott, who is being substituted by Councillor Cowie. Councillor Walker is present, as are Councillors Watson and Wilson, and as before, we have a number of officers present. So with that, I'll hand back to yourself, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth Ann. If we just continue with the agenda items for decision, agenda item number 8, that is the employment of an economic development officer, page 79 to 82, and Pauline Elliott will take us through this report. Pauline.
Thank you, Chair. Members are aware of the announcement during 2021 of 2 new UK-wide regeneration funds, namely the UK Levelling Up Fund and the UK Community Ownership Fund. The report explains that as part of that funding, the UK Government has also provided every local authority with £125,000 to help develop funding bids and thus realise the potential of the new funding, which does have the potential to attract significant funds into South Lanarkshire, potentially up to £60 million. However, the report does explain that development of the bids is very resource intensive and requires officer capacity to support all technical aspects of drafting and submitting the bids for approval. Hence, this report proposes that the Council uses part of the £125,000 to employ a further Grade 3 Economic Development Officer to join an external funding team for a period of 23 months. The employee implications are set out in section 5 of your report, and the financial implications are set out in section 6 of your report, which again explains there is no cost to the Council. The budget for the post is available through the funding received from the UK Government. Therefore, members, I invite you to approve the recommendation in section 2.1 of your report to employ an additional full-time equivalent economic development officer in the funding team for 23 months to support the development of the UK funds. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline. Any questions on agenda item 8?
No hands, Chair.
See any hands up? No, okay. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
Do we agree the report?
Agreed.
Okay, we're going to agenda item number 9, the Vacant and Derelict Land Fund, page 83 to 90. And Pauline is taking us through this report again. Pauline.
Thanks, Chair. Members, this is an annual report about the Scottish Government Finance Vacant and Derelict Land Fund. The purpose of the Vacant and Derelict Land Fund is to remove blight and dereliction, support communities and remove inequalities, and support physical regeneration. And a full list of the objectives are set out in section 3.1 of your report. Members, the report in front of you today has 2 purposes. It's backward looking, asking you to note the progress of the funding during 2021, and then also forward looking, asking you to approve the allocation of the funding for 21-22. Members, in 2021, the fund was used to support 3 projects, the Clyde Gateway Urban Regeneration Company for the remediation of Shawfield Phase 2 in Rutherglen, completion of environmental improvements and accessibility works at the former Milton Brick and Tile Works site in Carluke, and financial assistance towards site investigation for the Clyde Cycle Park at Boggleshold Road in Cambuslang. The progress against the delivery of these three projects is outlined in section 4 of your report. And then in section 5, we ask you to approve funding for 2021 towards the Cunningar Loop Urban Park phases 2 and 3. As members are aware, the Cunningar Loop Urban Park is an award-winning park. It's been a very valuable green space, delivering much needed health and recreation, particularly through the pandemic. Phase 2 will deliver a number of improvements to the park, and they're set out in the bullet points in section 5.1 at the top of page 85 in your report, including an extended riverside boardwalk, walk, a new art walk, and additional car parking. Phase 3 of the project, also for the Cunningar Loop Park, will deliver a community growing facility with raised beds, with the ability to develop health through growing healthy food, skills in horticulture, and community benefits as well. Members are also being asked to approve the allocation of an underspend to go towards the phase 3 from the 2021 funding, because that funding was allocated towards the delivery of a community resource in the Vogue building in Hamilton. The community facilities was removed from that particular building. Funding couldn't be used, so we're asking to roll it forward for a further phase of the urban park. So, members, I invite you to approve the recommendations set out in section 2 of your report, to note the progress against delivering the funding through 2021, and then approve the allocation of the funds for 21-22. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Pauline. Any questions on agenda item number 9?
No hands, Chair.
No hands. Okay. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
Do you agree the report?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, we're going to agenda item number 10, which is the community benefit funds, page 91 to 94. Pauline, taking us through this report again.
Thanks, Chair. This is a standard report because, as members are aware, we receive community benefits from the wind farms in South Lanarkshire, and the grants below 20,000 are delegated to officer, but any grant awards in excess of £20,000 have to come before you for approval. This particular report is asking you to approve a grant of £65,872 to the Colburn Miners Welfare Charitable Society. The Colburn Miners Welfare Charitable Society is an established charity, and they're looking to modernise community space in Colburn to facilitate events within the village, and the facility haven't had any major refurbishment for over 20 years. The details of the funding and the intervention rates are set out in section 4.1 of your report, and the entire funding package, including the match funding, is set out for you in section 4.8 of your report. Therefore, members, I invite you to approve the recommendation that a grant be awarded to Colburn Miners Welfare Charitable Society of up to £65,872 from the Renewable Energy Fund to facilitate the refurbishment of the Colburn Miners Welfare Halls. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Pauline. Any questions on agenda item number 10? Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I just noticed that for the match funding, they're putting £20,000 towards it themselves, and there's other lots of funding, 20,000 and 25, still to be confirmed. Can I just ascertain once again what happens if the unconfirmed match funding doesn't materialise?
Pauline?
Yeah, the grant award today is conditional on all other funding being in place. So if those funds don't come forward, then they'll have to find the match from elsewhere. Councillor Nealon. However, it's a bit chicken and egg. If the committee approves the renewable energy funding today, then that also helps facilitate the other funding. But it is a holistic package. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. You happy with that? Yep. Okay. No other hands up. I'll move the report.
I'll second it.
Can we agree the report?
Agreed.
Agenda item number 11 is just an item for noting. I'll move that report.
I'll second it.
Any questions on it? Lynn, you've got your hand up. Is that a legacy? Okay, thanks. Okay. I have no other urgent items of urgent business, but I would like to just say that people might have noticed there's a well-kent face missing from the management team today. That is the face of Shirley Cleland, the head of Fleet Environmental Services, who decided to retire. And her last working day was on Friday. I would just like to thank her in her absence for her 30 years plus service with local government, and 25 of these with South Lanarkshire Council. And I'd like to thank her for all the help she's given me in this post that I've been in for the past 4.5 years. So I know she's not here, but I'd just like to wish her well, whatever else she does. Jerry?
Yeah, like yourself, Chair, I've known Shirley since South Lanarkshire Council was created, and I spoke to her before she left, and I wish her all the best on behalf of the Labour group as well. She was a good servant to South Lanarkshire Council. Thanks,
Okay.
Chair.
Thanks, Jerry. Okay. Right, we'll just formally end the meeting then. Thank you all for your attendance. I'll see you all shortly at the next one, if not before. Take care.
Thanks.